Hey guys, it's me, Pokemon Jailbird HD, and today we have the Hive Beedrill draft explanation, and there's some explaining on my part to do for two reasons. One being, why are we in Beedrill when we were Kakuna last season, and two, why did I draft this team? And I will tackle the first question right now, in that we are now Hive Beedrill because the Hive actually expanded from being 3 to now 4 different leagues or divisions within one overall league, because there was enough interest to do so, and so so clearly now, with adding 16 more players into it, they had to think of, well, it couldn't just be Weedle, Kakuna, and Beedrill anymore with adding a fourth, so what ended up happening was they added the Mega Beedrill title to the fourth one. However, since that would be the top, what used to be Weedle, Kakuna, and Beedrill all moved up one. So we are in Beedrill, even though we did not earn a promotion through the normal ways you would by, being either top of the conference or winning the championship or just doing well in playoffs. No, we made playoffs. We were 4-6, but we only made playoffs because of the conference being bad, but we had a positive differential, so there's at least something. And we definitely would like to improve on that, that's for sure. And so, the team, it might do better, it might not. I'll be honest, I don't know if this team's going to be actually all that good or not, because it's an interesting team, to say the least. And so, when drafting in the Hive, it is both tiered and points. And the way that they do that is that it's still in a draft pool of tiers, being tiers 1 through 5, with then separate megas with their own tiering. However, then there is point values assigned within each of the tiers, and in many tiered drafts that only applies when it's part of your 4 free slots, in addition to your tier restricted slots being the 1 tier 1, 1 tier 2, 2 tier 3s, 1 tier 4, 1 tier 5, and then your mega. However, in this case, you have to have a legal 1,000 points for your whole team, and that includes still having to follow those tiered restrictions. So there is a tier, A and B for all the tiers except for tier 4. Tier 4 is just one tier 4 where everything is 60 points. Then there's tier 1A with 180, then 20 points less for the B. Then there's tier 2A with 20 points less for, tier B, and so on for both tier 3 and tier 5. And so that's a way to save points, is by taking, generally speaking, like if you're comparing this to a normal tier draft, mons that are worse within the tier, but it incentivizes you by giving you extra points. So that is something to keep in mind. Obviously, I'm not going to show the point breakdown, but obviously I have a legal team. And then also Zmons, it's going to be a point system for that. And this season, unlike last season where it was you either pick Z offensive or Z, offensive plus status, actually now all Z users will be Z, offensive plus status, all for this amount of points. And you don't have to worry about picking and choosing and trying to save points in your, picking your Z users. So with all that explaining out of the way, here's some explaining that you've probably tuned in for. The team. I was the 13th pick, so a lot of the usual mons are gone. Like the ones that get picked early, being a Celesteela, being, at least in the Hive, Mega Gallade. Those are gone, but that doesn't mean all the good mons are gone, that's for sure. And with the first pick, I prefer a statement pick, being either I am stating this is the best mon available, I am stating that this mon is underrated, or I'm stating that I can beat you even if I pick a mon that doesn't really deserve to be a first round pick with the first round pick. And this time I decided to go with the I'm stating that I believe this is the best mon left, and that mon was Tornadus Therian, which I have used very little, so I'm excited to give it another shot. And I don't think I've used it in this generation yet, so I have not had access to defog with it, which it's a really nice defogger since it gets regenerator, so it offsets the being weak to rocks, in my opinion. However, its massive move pool makes you not really want to run defog very often, and it just has very balanced stats. It's a legendary Pokemon, which I do most of the time tend to pick a lot of legendaries for that reason, being that they are generally bulky and all around, at least with decent bulk in addition to decent offense at the very least, because of just having to have those solid stats for being a legendary Pokemon. But this one, I would say is a great mon that people are sometimes afraid of because of missing Hurricanes, because Hurricane is obviously the highest base power stab move that you're gonna be wanting to use with the pure flying Tornadus Therian here, and I am not afraid of missing. If I miss, I miss. It's whatever. It's 70% still in my favor. I'm willing to take those chances, and in addition, it has just such great coverage typings, as well as solid physical and special attack to be able to be either. And it has the nice bulk with a combination of regenerator to really be able to take advantage of many assault vest sets, or just being a tanky mon, which I do like to have those speedy mons that can also be bulky. So Tornadus Therian seemed like a solid pick, and one that I'm glad to have with my first overall pick. And next up, when it came back to me very shortly, since this is a snake draft with 16 people, I looked at the rest of Tier 1, and I saw a mon in Tier 1A that I have used a few times, but not very much, that usually gets drafted before I can even think about it. And it's always, at least in my opinion, been seen as a very good mon. That's Clefable. Clefable is a solid fairy type, in my opinion. Its fairy typing is very great. At this point, its poison and steel does not get doubled up with the electric, ice, and rock weaknesses of Tornadus. However, it does provide great utility in that it has stealth rocks, it has its own recovery, it has wish passing and heal belling to be able to cleric for the other members of the team, as well as great abilities in Magic Guard and Unaware. So that's definitely some great things about it, and it has the coverage that normal types get because it was a normal type up until Generation 6. So it's something that I feel is just a solid all-around mon. The one thing that's lacking is really its stats. However, the 95 base HP makes it bulky enough to honestly be a solid defensive Pokemon, as well as its abilities, Magic Guard, allowing you not to status it, and it also would not take hazard damage, or Unaware, in the case where it can't be set up on, and it has its own setup options that can really get in the way of people being able to defeat Clefable despite its, lackluster stats. So I felt that these two provided a solid, start, because it's going to be a less offensive team than I usually pick, which ends up with almost no switch-ins in many matchups, and so I wanted to try to make a different team than that, and So when I first see these two mons, I see steel types can be an issue in the sense that both their stabs get walled by steel types. So I wanted something that could break those fatter steel types, since those are very common. And so I saw in tier 2A a mon that I've picked a few times again. I mean, I've played a lot of League format, so I guess I will be saying that a lot, where I've used most mons, but I haven't used at least these ones in a little while, and especially this one being Mamoswine. I always draft teams that are weak to ice and ground. Like, that's just without fail. Or, Bolt Beam seems to always be a huge weakness, but I picked up Mamoswine this time because of that base 130 attack and the ice ground typing being honestly very amazing offensively, and especially that ground typing helping me break those fat steel types. And it has the thick fat to help with defensive typing, as well as the oblivious to not be able to be taunted is nice. But this, defensively speaking, even though it's not really a defensive mon, but that base 110 HP with 80 and 60 defense and special defense respectively makes it still be able to be bulky. And so that's something that I still want to consider. Okay, well, what typings are is it helping for the rest of my team? Well, for Tornadus' sake, it resists the ice typing when it's thick fat, and then it's immune to the electric, so that's really nice. And unfortunately, on the other end, since ice is such a bad defensive typing, I do add another steel weakness, but I'm covering the steel types and the poison types that Clefable do not like, at least in an offensive manner, with the ground typing. So it was a pick that I was very comfortable making, and it's a mon that's just a huge threat because, ice and ground coverage is almost all it needs, but it does get some other coverage moves, as well as it does get Stealth Rock, but like the higher tier mons so far that I've picked, you don't want to have to run Rocks or Defog on the other two mons that I've picked, but if you have to, you have to, and so Mamoswine is that option if I do need to. However, it's just such an offensive powerhouse that I definitely wanted it, since right now I'm lacking that power. I mean, obviously it's only a few mons in, but something good to have. And so Mamoswine, I feel like, is just a welcome addition to the team. It's my speed tiering now. I have like 121, 60, and 80, so starting to fill it out a little bit, but we'll see how we can figure that out later. But since I'm trying to pick a not quite as offensive team, I'm looking at tier 3. I'm in 3A, and I see a mon that I just love using, and I think is just a solid mon. And it also helps, especially with special attacks, which is at least what I feel my team is mostly weak to, because Mamoswine's weak to water and grass, which are usually coming from special attackers, as well as, like I said earlier, the Tornadus has the electric and ice, which again are usually going to be special. And that mon is Snorlax. I love Snorlax. I love anytime I can get it. It's huge base HP is nice. Its attack is solid at 110. Its def is solid at 110. Defense at 65 is mediocre, and its speed obviously is lacking. But it's a bulky mon. It's got base 160 HP. Like you can see at just no HP investment, it's got 461. I think that's probably more than any of my other mons can even get if you fully invested. So that's amazing. It has 3 cool abilities. Immunity doesn't get used as much, but it is something that could be useful. Thick Fat and Gluttony are generally going to be the ones, though, with obviously now that's another Thick Fat mon, so Ice and Fire, while it's not really an issue to my team at all, it's something that I'm well guarded against now. But since if I'm not that weak to Ice and Fire in the end, then I don't have to run Thick Fat as much, and that can allow me to run Gluttony, which Gluttony has become a lot better in the 7th generation because of the super berries, as I think the VGC community sometimes calls them, got better in that they, or came into existence to be usable, because I don't think they worked the same way previously, or at least they didn't heal as much. But now the like Ipapa berry, the Wiki berry, the Mago berry, there's many of them that heal you up 50% when you're at a quarter health or less. However, with Gluttony, you actually take that at 50% or less. So you can basically get to full if you're hit to 50%, or you're at least over half no matter what when you have the berry, and it gets recycled, so you can keep using that berry. So instead of having to always use that rest talk set if you want to run curse, you can actually run recycle instead as a solid way to heal yourself. However, leftovers is very strong on a mon with such high base HP, since you get your percentage of the HP. But when you're looking at Snorlax, it's a normal type, so it's only weak to fighting. It only resists, ghost technically, but since it's so fat, having only the one weakness to fighting means that you resist a lot of special attacks, at least in my mind, because of the fact that you're just so bulky. And it has amazing offensive coverage, being a normal type, as well as the curse options, and I want to say it also Asia. So I mean, you can boost both defenses. You can boost that attack, and it gets just a great amount of typings for its moves, so that you are never really walled by anything. Especially if you decide to run like 4 attacks, say Assault Vest or Choice Banded, anything like that. It's got offense, but it's mainly a defensive mon when you think about it. But it's definitely a threat that you cannot sleep on. Yeah, I definitely wanted to get that in there. But for my team itself, it's more just a special sponge, at least at this point, because at least its stats lean that way. And so I do have plans for a more physically defensive mon later on, so I felt like this would be a nice complement. But that mon I don't intend to pick for a while, because it is the Mega that I intend to choose, and I usually like to choose Megas later on in the draft, so that will not be my next pick. But my next pick will be my second tier 3, and it's actually in tier 3B, not 3A, so I save 20 points there from the usual tier 3, but it's Incineroar. And Incineroar, now has access to Intimidate. It didn't the last time the Hive was going on, and I don't think it had Intimidate for most of the drafts I've been in, other than these ICBA. So Intimidate makes Incineroar a lot better, so I'm pretty sure it moved up in tier because of that. Because it's a starter, it has just naturally solid stats all around. Its 60 speed is the one that's really lacking. But other than that, great stats all around that you can count on. And the Fire Dark typing is very interesting in that, at least for my sake, it resists Steel, because I've got the Steel weakness for both Mamoswine and the Clefable, and it's at least at this point, I know I just drafted 3 mons weak to fighting in a row. However, I have 2 that resist it before that, as well as plans for more later, so I'm not too concerned about that. And this now, with the Intimidate, can take on physical attacks, can take on special attacks if you want to Assault Vest it, or just invest it that way. But it's also a solid offensive threat. It's got Swords Dance, it's got solid coverage, at least enough so, because the Fire and Dark typings are just honestly very good in its own right for coverage. So it has what you want. It has U-turn, so now I've got 2 mons with some Volt turning capabilities, and it's just, I think, a solid overall mon that could come quite a bit just because of its new ability, Intimidate, because Intimidate is just one of those abilities that's just so spammable, because yes, there's the Defiant and competitive users, but there's not that many. And so Intimidate, just getting a free -1 attack on physical attacker especially, that's just so valuable. So Incineroar seemed like a solid mon to me, and at this point I know that it's its addition right now doesn't really help any of the typings that are currently on there, but when I'm thinking long term of the Mega that I want, I think it helps cover weaknesses, and the Mega covers its weaknesses, so I'm not too concerned about that. But my 6th pick does cover some weaknesses that I mentioned earlier, and I looked back at Tier 2 because I'm getting extra points with my Mega. I already know this. And so, in Tier 2B, there was Goodra. Goodra, another specially defensive mon, but can be, ran both ways, just have to invest it properly and have the right set. Goodra is a mon that I personally like. I haven't used it a whole lot, but it's a dragon. Dragons are, at least in my opinion, the best typing because of the coverage they get, and then generally they just have high stats, and this is a pseudo, and the pseudos are all base 600 in base stat total, so it's got great stats all across the board. Defense being its lowest at 70, which isn't too terrible in combination with the 90 HP, but then when you look at that special defense, you're like, wow. And the speed at 80 is not bad. Right now, I do have a relatively slow team because I have a base like 60, 80, 30, 60, 80. Disregarding that first pick in Tornado, so I understand I have a slower team, but I have a much bulkier team already than I ever have. So I figured that I can probably make up for that lack of speed with the bulk. And Goodra just has that amazing cover that dragons get. It can be physical or special, which I think is very amazing in League format. That luxury of them not knowing whether it's going to be physical or special can be huge, or even just being able to be mixed. And it has cool abilities in Sap Sipper, Hydration, and Gooey. So I felt Goodra was a great pickup here because I did have now 2 mons weak to water with no resist, so here's a water resist. I do have 2 thick fat mons and a fire type, so I'm not really worried about ice. And then, at least at this point, I don't have a fairy resist, but we'll work on that. However, this is the only thing that's weak to fairy. And then for dragons, I have an ice type to take them on offensively, as well as a Clefable to take them on defensively, so I felt that Goodra fit pretty nicely at this point, and it was a mon I very much wanted to use and I haven't used in a while, which for sure I've said already many times, but I think Goodra's a really cool mon. I love it personally, at least as a mon and the design and whatnot. Since I haven't used it a whole lot in Draft League, that remains to be seen as if I love using it, but I think this can fit really nicely being a more specially defensive mon, because again, the Mega I'm picking is more physically defensive, so I think that this will definitely help with the Mega itself. But then next up, I'm looking at Tier 4. Since I've got my Tiers 1 through 3, I have my I have an extra now Tier 2 because I know I'm going to have the extra points to be able to afford it. And so when I'm looking in Tier 4 and I'm thinking to myself, I'm looking at my team, I only have Mammoth Swine as an instant wall breaker, so I wanted another one that I felt that had just that raw power. And in Tier 4 there was a couple mons that caught my eye, but one especially was Sock. Sock, now, it has Sturdy, which is really nice. Inner Focus is, it can come in handy. And Mold Breaker, Mold Breaker and Sturdy are going to be the ones that you generally use. And that 125 attack, but strong base power stab in close combat. That combination, it hits so hard. And Mold Breaker coming into play with, potentially taking away Filter, or taking away Levitate, Thick Fat, whatever it may be, it really helps, and it is 85 speed, so that's faster than what I have, so that's at least nice, but it provides power, and it's 75, 75, 75, bulk is not bad, so you don't really always need that Sturdy, but Sock to me, it's a strong fighting type. I do have 2 weaknesses to rock at this point, so it is a rock resist. However, I'm not too worried about, rock at this point. And at least, again, typing wise, I I mentioned when I picked Incineroar that Steel types kind of worried me in a sense that, you know, my main Mon, Tornadus, it has Heat Wave, but in Superpower, but it still has a hard time breaking through Steel types at times. So if I can just collect on ways to do that, which no, I have Mamoswine, Incineroar, and Sock. Sock definitely can break through Steel types, and so I felt that was nice. And it's a Mon I really enjoy using. I don't see it drafted a whole lot, honestly, but I think it's really good personally. So, and I enjoy using it. So, Sock. A lot of times it's choice, and Scarf Bandit is the most often things, but it does get other options. It has the bulk up, and it has just could be Assault Vested. It could be I think it gets Endures, and then it also has Sturdy, obviously, so you can run like a boosting stat berry like a Slack or Lychee, and it has great coverage, so I'm excited to use that. Then next up, I looked around, I saw there's a few teams that didn't have a Mega yet, so I just wanted to make sure I didn't lose out on this Mega since I was kind of banking on it at this point. And in Tier 2B of the Megas, which I felt it was too low of a tier for it, is Slowbro. And Mega Slowbro, yeah, Mega Slowbro, you don't have to Mega Evolve first turn, so I can keep it as regular bro with Regenerator as long as I need to. And then once I do Mega Evolve, it can't be crit. And that's really nice, especially when you consider it's a Mon with base 180 defense and base 95 HP, so generally speaking, people want to status it. Well, I have Snorlax and Clefable perfectly willing to take on status, so I figured that was a solid fit, and part of the reasoning that I wanted both of them. Now that I have this, both Snorlax and Goodra are solid specials, Mons, especially defensive Mons, while Slowbro is that wildly physically defensive Mon. So I think the combination of those, because they don't share any weaknesses across the board, and they resist each other's weaknesses, barring the like Fairy and Dragon, which I can deal with in other ways, or at least just tank the hits, I feel. So I think that Mega Slowbro can be very good on this team, as well as I think it's just an amazing Mon. Like its base 130 special attack once it Mega Evolves means it hits really hard without really having to invest, and especially if you're Calm Minding up, which is going to be the main set that everyone thinks of. It gets its own recovery and slack off in addition to having that regenerator at first, and it has all really cool coverage, including Trick Room, which you can see my team is pretty slow at this point, so people do have to prepare for that Trick Room. And it does get Iron Defense, which sounds disgusting, but hey, it's a thing. And so generally speaking, people are going to try to status this, and I understand that, so I feel like I can play around it. And the real big key to me for picking this was not having a Mega first turn, because taking advantage of Regenerator with a Mon that's already hard to kill is just amazing. And the Water Psychic typing for my team, I think, is really nice, because now it helps, again, patch up that fighting weakness that I was building up, but I didn't feel like it was too bad just because I now have 3 solid fighting resists to my 3 fighting weaknesses. I picked up some things that can take on electric type moves and some grass type moves previously, so, and also the Ghost and Dark being Sock and Snorlax, so I felt like Slowbro, and Bug, if you want to talk about Bug, that's, Tornadus and Clefable. So I felt like Mega Slowbro, I was kind of building up to it this whole point, because I was filling out typings that, if you only looked at the picks that I actually made, didn't always make a whole lot of sense for covering each other immediately, but with Mega Slowbro in mind, which I do generally draft with a Mega in mind, and then pick it late on. So I feel Mega Slowbro is a solid Mon, and one that I'm excited to use. I've been wanting to use this forever, and I've never get to pick it, because either it gets picked before, or it's just a league that is first turn Mega, and I don't want to pick this in a first turn Mega league, just because that limits it so much, and I'm not a fan of limiting Mega Slowbro. Then for my last free picks, I actually at this point have in mind 2 of the picks, but they're a tier 4 and a tier 5, because at this point I need a tier 5 for, and then the other 2 are free picks. However, I was trying to figure out what order to pick them in, and so then I figured those 2 I could probably wait on. So I'm actually going to pick one of the free mons, and when I'm looking around and I'm looking at my team, I see I don't really have as much hazard removal, I don't really have hazard setters, so, and I don't have poison type yet. So I'm going to actually pick Tentacruel, which I'm going to pick 2 water types in a row, I know, but they only share the 1 weakness in electric. So that's fine with me. And Tentacruel now is, I think it's my 2nd fastest mon, which is pretty funny because most people feel like it's going to, they don't run speed in a lot. So if that's what they want to assume, I'm perfectly fine with that. Might catch some people off guard running some speed, since my speed is lacking elsewhere. It's another especially defensive mon, at least in stats, but its typing lends itself to be a solid, Phys-Dev mon or just tanky mon. Or it can honestly just be a really solid support mon because of having those toxic spikes as well as having the rapid spin. And it does have some good offensive coverage, although the stats are left to be desired with the 70 attack and 80 special attack. But I felt like this was nice to be a T-Spikes absorber as well as hazard remover, in addition to setting up the T-Spikes if necessary. And I don't mind running dual water types. I think water types are usually pretty solid in the format, and that's one of the types that I would very much say is easy to have 2 of, because water typing itself only has 2 weaknesses. So especially if you can either make them not share any weaknesses or share 1, that's really easy to splash onto a team. Yes, I said splash. And yeah, so Tentacruel, it's a mon that a lot of people think is just underwhelming, but I feel for this team, since it doesn't have to be into that bulky role all the time, I think that I can make it do more than you normally see, and it supports the team, I feel, very well. So then, next up, I wanted Rotom. The regular Ghost Rotom. It's got base 91 speed, and I don't have a Ghost type yet, and it's another Defogger, as well as an Electric type that I do not have yet. But that actually got taken right before my pick, so I was really disappointed. So I, kicking myself that I picked Tentacruel first, and when I actually had planned to get Rotom before I even decided to get Tentacruel, and it was going to be my tier 5. So now I'm looking at tier 5 again. In tier 5A, there's not anything that really excites me, but there's a, at least in my opinion, a solid replacement in another Rotom form. But this one's actually Rotom Fan, which is in tier 5B in this league, so it only costs 20 points. And Rotom Fan, it's got better bulk stats than regular Rotom, and I think it's higher special attack as well. It's just the only thing that's really missing is that the speed is a little bit less, but 86 is fine. Again, my team's not going to be that fast. I understand that, but I have so much bulk that I feel like that's okay. I can deal with that, and I have that Trick Room threat, so I think that it'll be able to be handled. But this gives me an electric type. It gives me another ground immunity, because at this point I had a couple of ground weaknesses that I had drafted in Incineroar and Tentacruel, with only having Tornadus Therian as ground resist / immunity, because I do not have a grass type at this point, which is usually a lot of people's ground resist, because they want to think of Thousand Arrows. But I have a Mega Slowbro, so I honestly don't care about Zygarde that much. I figured, honestly, Mega Slowbro will be my way of taking it on more so than anything I draft at this point, barring maybe like a Tangela is the only thing I can think of that I would want to draft that would fit that role. But I didn't feel like Tangela added that much value to my team, since I already have Mega Slowbro, Snorlax, Goodra, Clefable as a bit solid, I felt, defensive core now with even Tentacruel added and even the Rotom Fan to an extent, so I didn't think it was necessary. Rotom Fan provides me another defogger. It has underwhelming air slash flying stab, but it is a solid electric type, at least in my opinion. The electric flying type is actually pretty solid, being only weak to the rock and ice, and I have ice pretty covered. I feel just rock, I understand I have more rock weaknesses than resist, but like I said earlier, Tornadus isn't really weak to stealth rocks in that way because of Regenerator, so not that concerned. It's got a lot of cool utility moves like Will-O-Wisp, Pain Split, and definitely I feel can fit a lot of roles. And I think, especially being at like 20 points, I felt this is decent replacement for regular Rotom. Obviously the only thing missing being the ghost typing, but that's okay. I don't mind, and this was, I wanted some more Volt Switch, Volt Turn action, so Rotom Fan fits that bill, gives me another defogger, and fills in a tier 5, because I wasn't really too excited about many tier 5s. And so because of that, I'm actually going to have 20 points left over, because I already had planned out my last pick, so I do end up in the draft with 20 points extra, because I'm picking another tier 4, and it's finally my Steel type, which I understand that usually Steel types are probably the most dominant typing. Like, Steel type is probably the most dominant typing itself in the draft format at this point because of how many fairies and dragons are really good. And I realized I don't have one, and I realized it when I probably around the time I was picking Mega Slowbro. Like, around that time I was like, well, Steel type, and I looked at the Steel types available. Man, do they go fast. Man, do they go fast. I feel like Steel types and Dark types go pretty fast, at least the really, popular ones go really quickly. And so, because Psychic types are also really good in my opinion. Like, I think that Steel types are the best, then Dragons and Fairies and Psychic types are probably the next tier. And so it is usually really nice to have a Dark type. It is really nice to have a Steel type, because especially Steel type resisting all three of those typings. So I know that I'm not going to get a great Steel type at this point. However, the two Steel types that, when I was actually looking at deciding which one I wanted to take, was Doublade and Durant. Now, I know what you're thinking. Durant can't switch into like shit. Well, physically it can switch in like once. Especially, yeah, probably not. But Doublade, on the other hand, again, special type attacks not as much, but because of Eviolite more so, and then physical, yes, definitely. However, I didn't want another ground weakness, and at that point I was also planning on picking Rotom regular, so I was already gonna have a ghost type. So that means I wanted Durant, and I felt that this was a better fit than Doublade because I needed speed. My team is extremely slow. And even with this doesn't patch it up by any means, but it's just another fast mon that they have to worry about. So my speed tiers are pretty whack, I know that, but I don't think it's as big of a deal like I keep saying because of the bulk I've drafted, which I never draft this much bulk. So I'm happy. Durant is a cool mon because it's base 109 attack, base 109 speed, and it gets hustle, which is again another reason that people will not pick this mon, because every move becomes at best 80% accurate. And like I said with Tornadus, I was willing to risk 70% accurate moves here. I'm willing to risk the 80%. That's not a problem for me at all, because if I'm gonna get a 1.5 times boost, so you're getting it a band, so I mean its attack stat already gets boosted quite a bit, so it's not even really a 109 base attack, it's even more than that, and then you can even boost it further with other things. So I felt Durant is solid. The coverage is decent. It gets what it needs. Hone Claws is especially amazing in the sense that once you get one Hone Claws up, if you can, then everything is actually going to be accurate after the hustle boost. So then you basically have now +2. And I felt that this was the best option for a steel type, and so I can now take on fairies a little better. Offensively, I understand that switching into them is going to be a little more difficult, but Durant is an easy fairy killer, as well as just it has enough coverage, like I said, to be able to handle most things. And it's only got the one weakness to fire, which I already have. I already have 2 water types. I have a dragon type. I have 2 thick fat mons, one of which actually resists fire after being thick fat, so I was not worried about that, and it's not weak to ground despite being a steel type, so I felt Durant was a solid fit here, and I think it's one of the better picks, at least for my team, but I can understand why a lot of people shy away from it, because they're all pussies. That's why. They're pussies and afraid to miss, but I am not afraid to miss. So yeah, Durant is the last pick, but that's something I wanted from quite early on. And so, when we look at the whole roster here, we have Tornadus Therian, Clefable, Mamoswine, Snorlax, Incineroar, Goodra, Sawk, Mega Slowbro, Tentacruel, Rotom and Durant, which I think that's a weird-ass looking team especially when I looked at the sprites page on the dock. Just looking at their sprites all together, I'm like, wow, this team is holy godly weird collection of odd monsters, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's not a standard team at all, but I think because the typings do cover themselves up pretty well, and I do have the flexibility of extra 20 points at this time to be able to make a move later on. So, for example, since I have 3 tier 3s and I have, for that sake, 2 tier 1s, and I have I think it's 3 tier 4s and 2 tier 2s. Like, I have multiple of, I think, every tier except for I have an extra of each tier except for tier 5. That gives me a lot of flexibility. And the extra 20 points now, since I didn't get regular Rotom and I got Rotom Fan, does give me that flexibility to adjust it if I feel it's needed. So that gives me something to work with. And lastly, Z-Mons. I feel, if I'm looking at the Mons that could potentially be used as Z, I would say Tornadus is a solid candidate. Snorlax is not that bad of a Z user. It has, even its own special Z move, as well as Incineroar does, and it's got decent coverage too. Goodra has a lot of coverage. Even Sawk has a lot of coverage. And then I would say Tentacruel, some people like to use it for Z Haze, but other than that, it's not that useful. But other than the fact that it does have coverage, so I guess it could be useful. So I think even then, that's one that could be. Rotom Fan and Durant both have some solid coverage, and especially with Durant having Hustle, it's you're gonna hit with that Z move, and it gets that Hustle boost. So I feel like I have actually, in all honesty, a lot of really good Z candidates. The way I ended up picking was, since it's based off of points, Tornadus was getting it. So I have like 240 points, and tier 1 is going to be the highest. Tornadus Therian, it's getting Z. I knew that from the start when I picked it, because I think it's one of the better Z users in the format. So Tornadus Therian, you get a Z. So then that does take away a good amount of points. Clefable, I didn't mention earlier because it, with Magic Guard, honestly, Life Orb's probably better if I want to really make it offensive. So I wasn't going to make it that. Then Mamoswine, I felt like I wasn't really going to use Z moves too often with that, because you're going to use, I guess Icium or Groundium in most scenarios, and I usually like to have options with it, which I feel like it's just not as useful because you're not going to run a lot of coverage beyond Ground and Ice, so wasn't going to use that. Snorlax was something I was very much considering, but I felt like I wasn't going to use a Z move on it as much because of Gluttony and just wanting, like, you know, leftovers or berries most of the time. So, no on the Snorlax. Incineroar definitely has some prowess to it to be able to use it as the Malicious Moonsault. It has solid coverage, but I ultimately decided no because Goodra, I felt I would use the Z more often on. I feel like with Incineroar, it has some weaknesses that I might want to use a berry for, as well as, you know, a solid Assault Vest or, you know, choice user. So I felt I wasn't going to use it as much, whereas Goodra, you know, most people think of it as Assault Vest, but I think it's many times, you know, bulky enough to just surprise someone with an offensive set, whether that be a, you know, Specs or a Band, but also Z moves could be really nice, especially with Z Draco, you know, is a very obvious one, because then you don't take the -2. Then we have Sock, which I felt like, you know, a lot of times you're going to use a choice, but I didn't think Z moves really helped it a whole lot, because at least in comparison to the other Mons, I have another tier 4 that I'd rather use it on, so based off of the points left, I could use it on either. I think it was at this point, you know, looking at the rest of the Mons, I could use either on Tentacruel, or I could use it on both Rotom Fan plus Sock or Durant, and I felt Durant was a better user, so Durant is going to be one, and then because I'm already telling you that Durant is and not Tentacruel, that means Rotom Fan is my other Z user. So my Z users end up being Tornadus Therian, Goodra, Rotom Fan, and Durant. So my two, you know, Mons with accuracy issues are both Z users, so that could definitely help. And then other than that, I have, you know, Rotom Fan and Goodra, who have some decent coverage, as well as surprising, you know, attack stats, being both sides for Goodra, and then special attack for Rotom Fan. So because a lot of times they're thought of defensive Mons, so I think those can surprise people, and those are solid picks. And so that is the team. That is my explanation. I don't expect to be highly rated in any, you know, power rankings by any means, because it is such a weird team, and I will get a lot of shit for having Durant as my only Steel type, and I feel like it's warranted. I don't think necessarily on paper my team is amazing, so like when people do power rankings, it's not going to stand out, other than for the fact that it's just so weird looking. But I feel like it's a nice change of pace for me. It looks like a really fun team to me. I don't know. Like, I think these are a fun group of Mons to use, and I can get creative with them. So I'm excited, and hopefully soon I'll be back with my week 1 battle, and we hopefully can do better than the 4 and 6 we did last season, and hopefully even more so we can win the whole damn thing and get promoted to Mega Beedrill. But with that, I want to thank you for watching. I mean, this has probably been a long video. If anyone's even still here, genuinely, I thank you, because I mean, I make these whether people are going to watch them or not, but I'm glad if I can, you know, if someone enjoys it, I'm, you know, glad that I can share this and share the love of Pokemon. But with that, I'm gonna get out of here and say bye!